Welcome to Love Recital Hall at the Moss Performing Arts Center at Colorado Mesa University in Grand Junction for tonight's debate between Colorado's gubernatorial candidates. Democrat Jared Polis is currently the U.S. Representative for Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, and Republican Walker Stapleton is currently Colorado's State Treasurer. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Ferrugia. I'm Managing Editor at Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm going to be questioning the candidates tonight, along with Charles Ashby of the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel. He's a veteran political reporter who has spent years covering Colorado and its legislature. And DENNY HERZOG, who is a former executive editor at the Sentinel and is now an adjunct lecturer here at Colorado Mesa University and advisor for the student newspaper. Tonight's debate will focus on issues important to rural Colorado. The candidates have agreed to the following rules for the debate. Each will have 1 minute to answer the questions posed. They can use that 1 minute to answer the question and to respond to an opponent if necessary. The moderators have the option of asking a follow-up question, and each candidate will have 30 seconds to respond to the follow-up. Now, our timekeeper will signal when the candidate has 10 seconds remaining and will signal when time is up. The candidate will be able to finish a sentence, but the moderator will interrupt when time is up. Each candidate will have 90 seconds for a closing statement. The candidates can have notes at the podium tonight, but no props. Now, we've invited guests in the audience tonight, and we ask that if you're in the hall, you refrain from participating in the debate. You're here to listen, not to applaud or cheer or hold up signs or otherwise voice approval or disapproval. And recording the event in the hall tonight is prohibited. Now, prior to the debate, we have solicited questions from viewers and readers around the state, and you're going to hear some of those questions tonight. And by a previous toss of the coin, Mr. Stapleton will be asked the first question. And Mr. Stapleton, the first question is about economic development in rural areas. Many Coloradans see the Front Range urban corridor as getting richer, while rural areas seem to be getting much poorer. Nearly 2/3 of rural counties are now designated as economically distressed and eligible, and I emphasize that word, eligible, for incentives. Yet taxpayer-funded incentives to attract companies to the state are focused on the Front Range. If you were elected, what new and specific steps would you take to increase incentives for companies to relocate in rural Colorado? And again, be specific.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be back here in Grand Junction, a place that I have visited dozens of times as treasurer and a place that I plan to be back dozens of times more as governor. I think the next governor of Colorado needs to have an economic plan that puts Coloradans first. And by putting Colorado first, you don't just put the metro area first, you put all of Colorado first. I will work with the Governor's Office of Economic Development to make sure that businesses are given the opportunity to locate to right here in the Western Slope, to Southern Colorado, to our Eastern Plains. It's one of the reasons why I was one of the earliest supporters of the President's economic plan and the more than 120 economic zones that it will, economic opportunity zones that it will create in the state of Colorado. Half of those economic opportunity zones are in rural areas of Colorado. This is in sharp contrast to my opponent, Congressman Polis, who entered federal legislation a few months ago to repeal the president's tax plan and take those economic opportunity zones away from Colorado. He represents the most radical extreme candidate for governor in Colorado's history.
Thank you very much. And your 1 minute is up.
Thank you.
Mr. Polis?
Thank you to President Foster, to CMU, Go Mavericks. I also want to thank the Daily Sentinel and Rocky Mountain PBS, and if nothing else, the two gubernatorial candidates have brought the rain, which is needed here in Mesa County and in Western Colorado. When we talk about a statewide economic development plan, and that's truly part of our challenge, because we need to make sure that no matter where you live in Colorado, you have great opportunities to succeed. We have a plan for rural broadband and internet connectivity to enable location-independent employment across Western Colorado, which isn't just high-skilled jobs, it's also call center workers with high school degrees, entrepreneurs, architects, to be able to work from the communities that we love. It's about protecting our outdoor industry jobs by protecting our public lands, an iconic part of who we are in Western Colorado. And it's about making sure that every child has access to an educational opportunity that helps prepare them for success, whether that includes a 4-year college, a 2-year college, or an apprenticeship or skill while in high school.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. A follow-up. I've heard you both talk about, broad generalities in this. I haven't heard anybody say what initiative you would envision specifically to bring economic development to rural areas. Mr. Stapleton?
Well, John, one of the things that I would focus on is being supportive of the Jordan Cove project. It's a program to bring enough natural gas from the Piceance Basin to power California for the next 50 years, a project that has the support of Senators Bennett and Gardner and Governor Hickenlooper, and Congressman Polis has been in Washington for a decade and refuses to support this project. It would be transformational to the economy of Western Colorado. It's another example why he's extreme and out of the mainstream.
Mr. Polis?
Well, look, I'm not going to use a project in Oregon as an excuse not to have a Western Colorado economic development strategy. If Jordan Cove moves forward in 8 or 9 years, there might be a few jobs more here in Western Colorado, and that's a good thing, but it can't be an excuse not to act now. I've done a number of startups. I co-founded something called TechStars and Patriot Bootcamp to help veterans get the skills they need to start jobs. I've been excited to visit co-working space here in Grand Junction and Montrose. I'm excited about what we can do on the capital formation front, the mentorship front, to help tomorrow's great companies start right here in rural Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. Denny?
Mr. Polis, you know, everyone in Colorado needs water. Water is a perennial and a bipartisan issue in this state. And the current state water plan, which you both say you support, calls for more than $100 million in spending just for water storage and conservation. The plan is designed to help balance the needs of farmers and ranchers in western Colorado with urban growth on the Front Range. How would you go about paying for it? And once again, please be specific, Mr. Polis.
So the state took a strong step forward with Governor Hickenlooper's efforts to convene the entire state around our very first water plan. First of all, as a matter of principle, having represented many Western Slope communities in Congress like Grand and Eagle County, I will oppose any trans-mountain diversions without agreement from Western Colorado. And I support water storage as part of an overall solution that includes additional efforts around conservation, both best practices in suburban and urban areas and new developments, as well as making sure that we have better incentives for farmers to be able to profit from conserving water. I think we all need to work together to fund the money we need to make sure that we have the water infrastructure not just for where our state is today, but where our state will be in 10 years and in 20 years. That supports not just our agricultural heritage, but the livelihood of many small family farmers, as well as our growing metropolitan areas.
Mr. Stapleton?
Well, Colorado's water and water future are the lifeblood of the Colorado that all of us want to have. We need to put our water plans first. I fully support funding Colorado's water plan. It will cost approximately $100 million per year, and I will prioritize it as a budget item that we will absolutely focus on during my time as governor. This is another issue where I have vast differences with Congressman Polis. I went to the Water Congress about a month ago in Vail, and I expressed my desire for us to find ways to fund more storage. He said he wanted to look at alternatives to storage. I'm not sure. I'm eager to hear what those alternatives are. And I said we needed to clean out existing tanks. I also recognize the contributions that severance taxes play. They're the largest provider of water conservation efforts in Colorado, and his past history to try and ban fracking would put that revenue source for water conservation in jeopardy. It's another extreme radical energy plan and water plan that the governor himself has called radical.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Next question.
Okay, so the displacement of water from rural areas to urban areas has been going on for years, but primarily because of rampant growth on the Front Range without any consideration for water sources. As you know, when farmers and ranchers can't continue to operate, they sell their water rights to others, including cities on the Front Range. Without water, the land goes dry, and we see these stretches of some counties where this buy and dry cycle has been a blight. Would you work to stop this practice? And if so, how would you do it, Mr. Stapleton?
Well, I think alt transfer has worked for a lot of farmers. I'm happy that the Colorado Farm Bureau a few days ago decided to endorse me. They bring $40 billion of economic development annually to Colorado and provide 170,000 jobs. And I think that we need to harness the power of new technology when it comes to water storage and water usage. What I don't want to do is what Congressman Polis wants to do, which is to run the energy industry out of Colorado, which would cost us 230,000 collective jobs and $32 billion of annual economic impact. He, in the past, unfortunately, a couple years ago, chose to bankroll a setback of 2,000 feet against the energy industry. The current governor had to plead with him not to do that, beg and plead with him, and it's why he's called his energy plan pretty radical. And you cannot have a water future in Colorado without a collaborative, constructive energy industry that puts Coloradans first.
Mr. Bullis?
Look, you're going to hear the words radical a lot from Walker Stapleton. That's just political rhetoric. What I'm focused on is bipartisan problem solving. Water's not a Republican or Democratic issue. Energy's not a Republican or Democratic issue. One of the things with severance taxes is it's hard to rely on over time because it relies on commodities pricing on national and international markets. So yes, it's an important funding source. Yes, I strongly oppose 112. And yes, I want to make sure that we have a thriving energy industry, but I also want to make sure we have a diverse economy in Western Colorado. Water is incredibly important, and I want to address the question, Charles. I think it's great for farmers to have alternatives like ATMs to avoid having to sell their water rights and be able to lease them on a short-term basis. We need to encourage best practices in agriculture to make sure that farmers can have more water efficiency and increase their profits at the same time with alternative crops, as well as with new technology and practices, some of which are being developed at CSU and some of which people are working here right here at CMU.
A quick follow-up, if I may. I'm not sure you quite got to the question. I know, Mr. Polish, you started to. I want to know whether you would stop the practice, and if you would, what would you do? I mean, such as smart growth or something like that.
Well, again, it's up to individual farmers. So if you're saying, am I going to force farmers not to sell their water? Of course not. I want alternative vehicles that they can recognize some of the economic benefit from reducing their water usage without losing their rights. I think this use or lose it concept creates a perverse incentives for farmers to actually use more water even if it doesn't increase their overall crop efficiency. I think we can support family farms better by creating new financing mechanisms to actually make sure that farmers are rewarded for best practices.
Mr. Stapleton?
Well, one of the ways you help the water in Colorado is to support bipartisan water projects like the Northern Integrated Supply Project, which is the most important water project to Northern Colorado. It has bipartisan support. It's had a 10-year environmental review, and Congressman Polis steadfastly refuses to support it. I don't know why. Congressman, you should join a bipartisan leadership team and support that project. It's another example of you being out of the mainstream, not putting Colorado's interests first, and putting Washington's interests first.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Next question for Mr. Stapleton. We talked about the Jordan Cove project. The proposed Jordan Cove project, for those of you who don't know, is to export liquefied natural gas from Oregon. It would ship natural gas from our region and other regions to the Asian markets, and that would bring big money and a lot of money into Colorado and other parts of the country. It would also increase pressure to drill in western Colorado. Grand Junction resident Carol Brown asked, do you support the Jordan Cove project, including considering increased water use issues? That would be one more element of local impact. Do you support this increased drilling, and if you do, how should it be managed?
I absolutely support this project. I think this project will be transformational for Western Colorado. It's why we have a great bipartisan leadership team that I invite Congressman Polis to join. We have enough natural gas reserves in the Piceance Basin to power the state of California for the next 50 years. It's why 4 major natural gas companies have been signed up for this project. I have met with leaders in Asia and I know the demand is there. And this will raise all boats economically in Colorado. Congressman Polis, his views on this issue are pretty radical, as Governor Hickenlooper has said. They are out of the mainstream of his party, and they are not going to put Western Colorado and Western Colorado's values first. And I hope that he will change his mind tonight, but he has steadfastly refused, even though this project has been thoroughly studied and now been green-lighted by the federal government.
Mr. Polis.
Well, look, if it's out of the mainstream, I have the most moderate voting record of all 3 Democrats from Colorado. If you're never going to vote for a Democrat, you might not vote for me, but if you want one who has a business background, who's created hundreds of jobs, helped others start companies, and helped Colorado work for everybody, I'm your candidate. Look, this is not up to a governor, and it's the same with the Northern Integrated Supply Project, NISP. What my role as a congressman will be and what my role as a governor will be to make sure that if these projects move forward, they actually benefit Colorado, not just Oregon. I want to make sure that those jobs that are created in Colorado. I think it's short-sighted to give away your negotiating leverage and be a cheerleader when you can actually be somebody that can help mold the project to benefit Western Colorado, to make sure, for instance, that we don't have work crews just coming in from other states, that we employ Coloradans, that we build the skills working with CMU and other places for those jobs. But again, most importantly, this can't be seen as an excuse not to have a Western economic development strategy. I have one, and we're ready to make Western Colorado work for you.
A follow-up here. We've talked about local impact as one element of this. Neither one of you actually addressed that. What new measures would you support to ensure that local communities have a voice in this development? We haven't addressed that. Mr. Polis?
Yeah, I've been very outspoken in making sure that decisions around extraction and zoning have local input, because we shape our communities on the ground. There's a big difference between Walker, Stapleton, and I oppose Amendment 74, which would put huge liabilities on our cities and on our counties just for doing their work of integrating their communities. I would love to help formalize the degree of local control and the parameters of local control around extraction and other industrialized activities. It's not that there's no local control today, but a lot of it exists in a gray area.
All right,
I was able to
forge
a compromise with John Hickenlooper,
Thank you,
the
Mr.
oil and gas
Polis.
industry,
Your time is
and the
up.
environmentalists to help make it happen.
Mr. Polis, thank you. Mr. Stapleton, new initiatives to give local communities a voice?
Well, you're darn right we have a difference. I support a One Colorado energy policy that every governor from Roy Romer on has supported in a bipartisan way, working collaboratively with the industry. Western Colorado is an awesome example of outdoor industry working with the energy industry to bring projects like the Palisade Plunge to Colorado. We achieve more working, putting Colorado first than battling. And Congressman Polis doesn't believe that. He believes in battling the industry and taking away a uniform statewide policy, which is why his energy policy is both radical and extreme.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton.
Okay.
Charles?
All right, Mr. Polis, you have said that you want all power in the state's electric grid to come from renewable energy sources by 2040 with no oil or gas sources. Mr. Stapleton, you have not specified what renewable energy goals should be. Now, what, if anything, would each of you do to set aside the rhetoric and the politics and take specific steps to set reasonable and realistic goals for renewable energy in Colorado? And how would you reach across the aisle, and please focus on this point, how would you reach across the aisle to accomplish it? Mr. Stapleton?
Well, I'm the only candidate in this race with an all-of-the-above energy policy. I support all forms of energy. I support wind, I support solar, I support natural gas, and I support oil. And I also support clean coal technology. Congressman Polis envisions a Colorado where we have zero fossil fuels. When I was born, fossil fuels represented 83% of energy production, and today they represent 83% of energy production. If you talk to energy experts, they'll tell you that once you get to a 65 or 70% renewables quotient, that it becomes a law of diminishing returns. That is, the capital invested can't compensate for the fact that as much as we would like it, the sun doesn't shine 24/7 and the wind doesn't blow. And so that gets put on the Coloradans who can afford it the least. And I am not for mandates like Congressman Polis is, which would cost $45 billion and tax people more for heating their homes in winter and turning on the lights.
Mr. Polis?
Yeah, look, I think Walker's misrepresented my plans more than he's talked about his own. First of all, I have never supported a 100% mandate. We have a goal of reaching 100% renewable energy by 2040. To do that, of course, we're going to reach across the aisle. I sponsor a bill nationally with Paul Gosar, a very conservative Republican from Arizona, to make it easier to site renewable energy projects on federal public land. I have a similar idea here for Colorado. Let's make it easier on our state land to expedite the processing, reducing red tape, and allowing wind and solar projects to go up quicker. Let's raise the cap on solar gardens to allow community-scale solar to produce even more energy. Let's make sure that people who have home solar are able to get compensated for putting it back on the grid and enable people to invest in distributed storage. Let's work with the Public Utilities Commission to make sure that we can move towards a 100% renewable energy future, which will produce savings today for all consumers. Because Xcel Energy will tell you it costs 20% less to build new wind energy than even the cost of existing coal right now.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you restating your platforms about your energy policies. We already knew that. The question was, how would you reach across the aisle and make a policy that can be accepted by everybody? Mr. Polis.
Well, again, I sponsor a bill nationally with one of the most conservative Republicans in the United States Congress. I have a plan in the state to partner. I supported a bill that one of the most conservative senators, Senator Lundberg from Loveland, supported to make it allow for distributed storage. That's one aspect of my plan that the legislature already passed and Governor Hickenlooper already signed. We have about 10 more to go, and I think most of them will be bipartisan because it involves cutting red tape, reducing costs, and making sure that we can invest in renewable energy projects and provide cheaper, cleaner, green energy, because of course it leads to cleaner air and doing our part on climate.
Mr. Stapleton.
Congressman Polis, during the last congressional session, you voted with Nancy Pelosi 94% of the time. I think Colorado deserves and needs a governor that's more than 6% bipartisan. I support an energy policy that Governor Hickenlooper and Governor Ritter have supported before him. I supported Governor Hickenlooper when he told you that a 2,000-foot setback was going to crush the energy industry. And your renewable plan will cost $45 billion. Our budget is $30 billion. That's 150% of our entire budget, and you have no way to pay for it. So yes, that is an extreme radical energy position.
Thank you. In the state budget, as you both know, increased funding for education is often pitted and mostly pitted against the need for transportation. So we're going to begin with education. The proposed Amendment 73 would collect new taxes amounting to more than $1.5 billion annually for education to support programs like preschool and special education. Do you support it, and why or why not?
I do not support it because it is a progressive tax, and as the father of 3 school-age kids, I want to make sure that every dollar that we ask Coloradans to invest in education winds up in the classroom where it belongs. That's not happening right now. 20 cents on the dollar is being siphoned off by school districts for para obligations, our pension system, another up to 12 cents on the dollar for teachers. And if you look across our school districts, what you find is that the number of students has grown by about 6% since 2011, the number of teachers by about 8%, and administrative costs have grown by 35%. Until we get that problem under control and until we get the transparency and accountability we all deserve as parents and investors in our future education system, we shouldn't just go to the ballot and ask taxpayers for a tax increase. It's wrong and it's misguided. Under Congressman Polis's plan, he has no way to fund our obligations for education in the future because he's going to bankrupt Colorado's economy.
Mr. Polis.
Well, look, I've not only created businesses and hundreds of jobs, I actually started and was superintendent of a successful charter school in Thornton, Aurora, and Lakewood. It's now expanded into New Mexico. And I bring the expertise of not only having run a school as superintendent, not having chaired a bipartisan state board, but helping to write the law, the bipartisan law, Every Student Succeeds Act, to replace No Child Left Behind and give states more flexibility about meeting the learning needs of all kids. Congratulations to Mesa County voters for passing a mill levy last year that shows that you value your public schools. I haven't taken a position on 73. There's a few initiatives that I have taken positions on because I feel strongly this is one that's appropriately up to the voters. We have a plan to end decades of underinvestment in our public schools. It'll be our top priority for general fund expenditures and making sure that every child in our state has access to preschool and kindergarten. Walker's probably going to call that a radical idea. Oklahoma has universal preschool and kindergarten. If it ain't too radical for Oklahoma, I think we deserve it right here in Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Polis.
You know, each of you has a very different vision of public education in Colorado. Mr. Polis, you've said you want to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on preschool and kindergarten for all Colorado children. Mr. Stapleton talks about school vouchers and charter schools and says essentially we have enough money for education, we just need to spend it more wisely. Yet no one has convinced the legislature to take either position. How would you once again reach across the aisle and reach a compromise to break this stalemate? Please be as specific as you can. Mr. Polis?
Yeah, I think early childhood education, preschool and kindergarten is not a partisan issue, right? If you're a young family with a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, you're struggling with a high cost of preschool and kindergarten. In our state, all we have is half-day kindergarten. And you can't tell me in a wealthy state like Colorado that we can't do what Oklahoma and a number of other states do. And we have a plan to pay for it with public-private partnerships like Pay for Success, like Westminster School District has implemented universal kindergarten and at least half-day preschool for all their kids today, paid for out of future savings because preschool and kindergarten result in lower special education rates and lower grade repetition rates. We need to give every child in our state a strong start. All we have right now is half-day kindergarten. Guess what? If you're very low income, we have a few preschool slots and full-day kindergarten slots. If you're wealthy, like Walker and I, we can afford preschool and kindergarten for our kids. Guess who gets left behind? The middle class. I'm going to put the middle class first here in Colorado.
Mr. Stapleton?
Well, Congressman Polis, I'm so glad you mentioned Pay for Success, because it's one of the programs that I worked on from the Treasurer's office in a bipartisan way to get through a Republican-controlled Senate. And one of the things that I worked on during my time as Treasurer is cost savings, so school districts could hire private sector contractors to save money. I would love to have preschool, and I would love for preschool to be free because I have a preschool-age daughter. But I'm not just going to promise and hoodwink taxpayers with empty government promises and no way to pay for it. I don't think you have a way to pay for it. It doesn't make sense to me that you wouldn't support Amendment 73, a progressive tax increase, except for the fact that your preschool plan alone would eat up every dollar that Amendment 73 spends. Yes, I believe we can do better when it comes to education in Colorado, and we must for our school children in Colorado. And I will take a numbers-based approach to solving this problem, and I will do exactly what I've done as treasurer, work with Democrats in the legislature to get something done that benefits all our kids without bankrupting Colorado's economy at the same time.
Denny has a follow-up.
Yeah, as a follow-up, Mr. Stapleton, could you give us one specific example of what you would do to bridge the gap in the legislature to get it off dead center?
Absolutely. I just did. I worked on early childhood education with Democrats in the state Senate and a Democratic-controlled legislature that allowed school districts to hire private sector companies, and part of the compensation was based on the cost savings that they brought to school districts in Colorado. This has been a bipartisan approach that I was involved with as treasurer, and I will continue to find bipartisan ways to make sure that we have more dollars in the classroom and improve student-teacher ratios.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Mr. Polis, again, what good example will you give us to reach across the aisle?
I helped write the bipartisan Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaced No Child Left Behind and passed overwhelmingly with a majority of Republicans and Democrats voting for it. I chaired the bipartisan State Board of Education, which was evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. They chose me to be vice chair and chair of that board to represent all students in our state. I've also been a superintendent, and you know what? School boards and superintendent doesn't mean they're not political, but they're definitely not partisan. And I was proud to start a successful charter school that has served thousands of Colorado kids.
Thank you, Mr. Polis.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about how to pay for education. Now let's talk about how to pay for transportation. As you both know, there are two ballot measures on this year's ballot dealing with transportation. Proposition 110 would increase sales taxes to raise about $767 million a year, allocating 40% of that money to local governments. Proposition 109 would issue up to $3.5 billion in bonds to fund specific projects, most of which would be on the Front Range, and require the legislature to find about $260 million a year to pay back those bonds for the next 20 years. Which proposal, if either, would you support and why? Mr. Polis?
I'm strongly against 109, which Walker will tell you why he supports. It creates billions of dollars of debt for the state, further indebting Western Colorado residents to pay for Front Range projects without any new revenue stream. It'll lead to reductions in our funding for education, and when the state enters a recession, could be absolutely devastating to every other budget priority we have. 110 is a legitimate effort by the Denver Chamber, Club 20, and many other groups to find a dedicated funding mechanism for our roads. It's not the funding mechanism that I would choose, but the voters will have the choice of whether to approve it this November. If both fail, I'll look forward to building a statewide coalition of Republicans, Democrats, the business community, Western Coloradans, and rural Coloradans to try to make sure that we can have a cohesive approach to meeting our infrastructure needs across our entire state.
Mr. Stapleton.
Well, I support 109 because I think the onus of responsibility should be on state government. I know we have the dollars in the general fund, and I want to put the responsibility in the next governor's hand for finding the transportation needs that will take Colorado's economy forward to the 21st century without simply reflexively soaking taxpayers for another tax increase. The reason why I don't support 110 is that approximately 60 cents on the dollar will actually be spent on roads and bridges and roads. This is another difference between my plan for economic development and to fix our crumbling infrastructure and Congressman Polis's. He believes that we should actually fund multimodal transportation, underutilized public transit, bike lanes, which I think are totally cool. I'm a biker myself. I have a mountain bike and a road bike. But listen, Colorado's need is around roads and bridges and roads. And he has no way to pay for it. So I do. Thank you.
Well, as a quick follow-up, if I may, Mr. Stapleton, You said that it would devastate, I'm sorry, you said there was money in the general fund. Mr. Polis said it would devastate the state budget. You didn't say if that bonding measure passed, where would you find the $260 million a year to pay for it?
I've talked about 3 different dedicated sources of revenue that I want to bring to transportation, actually 4 in the general fund. Number 1 is my support for the federal tax plan. Because of the federal tax plan, we were able to appropriate $225 million for a para-fix from the general fund. That's 1. Number 2, I've talked about sports gambling. It's a $150 billion industry. We should tax it at 15%. Number 3, I've talked about, am I out of time?
No.
Number 3, I've talked about
Now
fixing
you're out of time.
a broken medical marijuana system that has a 50% price disparity.
Okay.
And it said I was out of time.
You're out
on
of time
that
now.
thing.
Okay.
So I think we can find the money.
Look, even if Colorado's gaming were to produce the same revenues as Nevada, it would take 600 years for that revenue stream to pay for our infrastructure. Medical marijuana taxes go to capital construction of schools. If the voters want to change that, they can, but it's not nearly enough revenue for our roads. Look, if both initiatives fail this November, you're going to need a governor who will be convener-in-chief to pull people together and unite people, right? Not somebody who's interested in name-calling, but somebody who unites people to make sure we solve a real important Colorado issue to keep our state livable.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. Denny?
Mr. Polis, we spend a lot of time in Colorado talking about the north to south I-25 corridor and its importance for the state and particularly for metro area commuters. But what about the east to west I-70 corridor or Highway 50? These and others are economic lifelines for commerce and tourism. As governor, what would you do to strengthen transportation infrastructure between eastern and western Colorado?
So I was able to work with Scott Tipton to help lead the efforts in the last transportation bill to designate Highway 70 west of the divide all the way to Utah as a high priority freight corridor nationally, opening up an additional funding streams. I also worked to get the funding successfully for a missed fire suppression system at the Eisenhower Tunnel, having represented communities on both sides. Highway 70 is not just critical for those of us who live here, it's also one of the most important economic arteries of Colorado. Entire communities in the high country and many jobs in Grand Junction depend on access on Highway 70. I'm committed to make sure we use what we have the best we can with zip lanes and reversible lanes for our high traffic areas during peak periods, as well as making sure that we work to get funding from the federal government to make sure that we can make the improvements we need to make Highway 70 more manageable.
Mr. Stapleton?
Well, I think it's important that Colorado have a governor that recognizes that I-25 and I-70 are the lifeblood of Colorado. I believe Congressman Polis, his view of Colorado is Highway 36 connecting Denver and Boulder. My view is that I-70 goes far beyond Vail, and we need to fund I-70 and I-25. And I didn't have the time to say this in the last question, but one of the things that we've worked on is an analysis of what Colorado spends per mile as opposed to 6 to 8 other mountain states. And we have found that if we can spend what the other 6 mountain states around us spend on maintenance and other costs per mile, we could have an extra $160 million approximately that we could use for bonding. This is a creative idea that takes leadership from the governor's office. Instead of reflexively promising things with no way to pay for them, loading up our state with debt and empty government promises like Congressman Polis wants to do. He has proposed $90 billion of spending, tripling our state budget obligations, and doesn't have a single way to pay for it. That is Washington speak for bankruptcy.
All right, one more follow-up on transportation. If both of those ballot measures do not pass, as you may well know, the legislature put another measure on next year's ballot in 2019 to issue, I believe it was up to $2.6 billion in bonds, maybe it was less than that. That would automatically go on the ballot next year. One of you would be governor. Would you support that, or would you try to change that, Mr. Stapleton?
For transportation? No, it's not going to be enough, and that's why we need more dedicated sources of revenue. And I've come up with 4 separate ones for the general fund. He has not come up with a single one. I will make funding transportation throughout Colorado the #1 priority of my administration as governor, and 1A will be finding more attainable housing. I say attainable versus affordable because what may be affordable for somebody in the metro area may not be attainable for somebody in western Colorado. Both of those are inextricably linked to have a plan that puts Coloradans first in economic development.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Mr. Polis, again on the bonding issue for 2019.
Yeah, first I find it ironic that Walker accuses me of debt when he's the only one here supporting a ballot initiative that would put the state more than $3 billion more in debt without revenue. I would look to find a better deal, working with Republicans and Democrats. First of all, we need to figure out why 109 and 110 failed, what the voters want. I think we need to figure out how to have a meaningful statewide plan. I think there's some low-hanging fruit to have more traffic on 70 going eastward, people that can fly into Grand Junction Airport with the improvements we need to make from California and Texas to visit our high country. That's a whole other corridor that has great potential.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. Charles?
Okay, now we're going to switch gears to health care, and we have a specific question for each of you. And I'll ask the first one of Mr. Polis. You have advocated for a single-payer system such as Medicare for everyone in the state and for the country. How would Colorado taxpayers foot the bill for that? It would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Mr. Polis?
Yeah, as you know, I've supported Medicare for all nationally. We already cover our most costly, highest cost population, our elderly. We should have a basic level of care for everybody. My goal in healthcare is to save Coloradans money. I have started companies that created hundreds of jobs. We provided healthcare benefits, and as I listen to small businesses across the state, it's usually one of the first or second things out of their mouth, the high cost of healthcare. We have a 100-day plan to address that. We want to model Medicaid after bundled payment systems like Arkansas, which have been proven to reduce costs by 20 to 30%. We want to create a reinsurance plan for some of the highest cost cases to prevent them from driving up rates for small businesses and individuals. We have a plan to address the pricing disparities that are ravaging western Colorado, paying sometimes 30, 40, 50% more than Front Range residents by reconfiguring the pricing zones to make sure we have close to parity. We have a 100-day plan to work with Republicans and Democrats to save you money on health care and expand coverage.
Mr. Stapleton.
Well, I mean, I couldn't disagree more. One of the bipartisan things that I did that I am the most proud of is I worked with Governor Ritter, a Democratic governor, to defeat Amendment 69, government-run health care, less than 2 years ago in Colorado. And we worked across party lines because we understood that the associated payroll tax was going to be 10% or more on all businesses. And the cost was going to be at least $25 billion. And because it would result in even less rural area doctors and pervasive underpayment to doctors and physicians assistants. Now, less than 2 years later, Congressman Polis is proposing an extreme and radical form of health care that the former governor of Colorado and I worked to defeat feverishly less than 2 years ago. His health care plan is more expensive for Colorado. It will result in longer lines for the people that can least afford it. We've already had 70% premium increases over the last 3 years. It is not compassionate, it is cruel, and it will make our health care problems worse in Colorado.
Mr. Stapleton, you've talked about reducing 1.4 million people who receive Medicaid benefits because it's taking money away from schools and roads. How would you reduce the state-paid Medicaid benefits without endangering the hospitals and healthcare providers, particularly in rural areas that depend on this program to keep their doors open and provide services to those who otherwise couldn't afford it? How can you cut these benefits and then hurt rural Colorado?
Just to be clear, John, I have never said that I am for reducing the Medicaid rolls by 1.4 million people. I would absolutely not support that. What I have said is we have a moral obligation for Medicaid because half of the Medicaid population are kids, even though they only represent about a quarter of the cost. And so what I would do is I would work with companies like HCPF, with federal state government agencies like HCPF, with DHS, which is the state regulatory system for healthcare nonprofits, to actually do a better job of administrating Medicaid rollout. We've had issues with fraud and abuse and people that qualify that shouldn't qualify. The only way we're going to fix this is to have all the government agencies involved in Medicaid collaboratively work on the front lines of how to make this system better for young people, for old people, for sick people. That is the plan that I want to enact. I don't want to drive our medical care off a cliff. And no, I have never said and would never support 1.4 million people being taken off the Medicaid rolls.
Mr. Polis.
Well, apparently Walker's idea of radical is allowing Colorado families to have affordable health care. He's mentioned Bill Ritter 4 times. Bill Ritter is a supporter of me and is campaigning for me. He's mentioned John Hickenlooper 3 times. John Hickenlooper supporting me for governor over Walker Stapleton and is campaigning for me. We need to reduce costs here in Colorado, and yes, that begins with defending what we have. We need to defend the Medicaid expansion. If the Medicaid expansion were eliminated, and Walker has talked about phasing it out, Not only does that throw up to 400,000 Coloradans off of the health care they have today, but it drives up costs for the rest of us who pay for our own insurance, because we're all paying the high costs of uncompensated care because of the cost shifting at providers. We're paying more. So yes, we'll defend the Medicaid expansion, and we'll use bundled payment systems, which have been proven in states like Arkansas, to save 20 to 30%. And we'll pass those savings along to you and save your family money on your health care bill.
And a follow-up here, do you support reduction of Medicaid expansion? Is that true?
No, I support making the current system better so that we can improve access and affordability to the system that we have. I support getting a federal waiver from the federal government so that young people can have plans with higher deductibles and less premiums because they're healthy more often. What I don't support is Congressman Polis's plan that would make access to life-saving drugs for critically ill people and children. I have a friend who lives right here in Grand Junction with a daughter whose shots cost $10,000 every quarter. Under Congressman Polis's plan, she wouldn't be able to get access to that medication. That is not compassionate, it is cruel, and it will result in less quality care in Colorado.
Thank you.
So, yeah, my plan is the opposite of everything that Walker said. We want to take on the prescription drug companies because Coloradans are tired of being ripped off on prescription drugs. Your friend Walker and my friends who have life-saving prescription drugs shouldn't be forced to pay 5 to 10 times as much as our friends in Canada or Germany or other countries. We support allowing reimportation of prescription drugs, preventing price gouging from prescription drug companies, taking on the big pharmaceutical lobby to save you money on health care.
Could I respond to that, please?
Nope. We're going on to the next question.
Sorry, now let's go on to immigration for a little bit and economic development. The current federal government has cut down on the number of temporary visas for agricultural and service workers, known as H-2A and H-2B visas. How can you as governor help, knowing that this is a federal issue, how can you as governor help Colorado's agricultural and tourism businesses get the legal seasonal workers they need to do the jobs that few Americans want?
Well, I have said
Mr. Polis, I think, is up.
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter, and I've worked with the agricultural industry. I've worked with Ken Buck and Scott Tipton on others in making sure we have a strong H-2B program, that people can get back workers that have come seasonally. Of course, we need an overall fix with regard to our broken immigration system, but in the meantime, we shouldn't make small businesses, farmers, and the construction industry and others pay the price. As governor, I'll make sure I stand for all Coloradans and make sure that we have a immigration policy that reflects the fact that we're a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws. The two are and must be reconciled at the federal level. As governor, I'll stand up for all Coloradans and let a president of either party know that we need to put Colorado first and make sure we have access to the people we need to help grow our economy and help Coloradans not just get by, but thrive.
Mr. Stapleton.
Well, we need to have a Colorado that all of us want to have. We need to be welcoming to immigrants. It is why I've said that I support Dreamers. This is a federal issue that needs to be resolved. I support the H-2 visas that are so important for the agriculture industry. I also support the J-1 visas, which allow students from South American countries to come to Colorado primarily for 90 to 120 days, and a lot of them end up working in our ski industry, where there's a chronic housing shortage in dormitory-style housing for a 90 or 120-day period. That's a $50 million and 50,000 jobs. 50 billion and 5 billion and 50,000 jobs. 5 billion, 50,000 jobs to Colorado. I got it. Geez, I feel like a kid in a spelling bee. Anyway, and so I think Coloradans want a governor who's going to work with the president when it benefits Colorado and is going to stand up on misguided federal policies.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Denny?
Mr. Stapleton, when the federal government reduces the number of these legal foreign worker visas, it very well could force employers to seek illegal help to do the work that farmers and ranchers need to get done in order to stay in business. Will you cooperate with the current administration to seek out undocumented workers in rural areas for deportation?
No, I will not. That's not a job of the governor. That's the job of the federal government to deal with immigration policy. I think we have a broken immigration policy that has existed many times. Congressman Polis has been in Washington for 10 years. Republicans and Democrats are equally complicit in not fixing our federal immigration policies. I disagree with Congressman Polis and his party's platform in this election of making Colorado a sanctuary state I define a sanctuary city as somebody who has entered this country illegally and committed a felony. And I don't think law and order officials should be facing legal jeopardy just for trying to keep people in jail to keep their communities safe, like they are doing right now, because we don't have a uniform policy that has the support that we should have for sheriffs and first responders and DAs that are on the front lines of keeping our communities safe.
Mr. Polis.
First of all, I'm not for Colorado being a sanctuary state. Even during our Democratic primary, none of the Democrats running for governor were for that. What I am for is empowering local law enforcement to keep our communities safe. I respect local control through sheriff's office, through police departments, and we need to make sure that with the limited resources they have, they're able to keep us safe. And that, of course, includes in areas that have large immigrant communities, earning the trust of those immigrant communities so that crimes are reported and prosecuted rather than hidden because of fear of deportation for victims. So I think, of course, we need to empower our local law enforcement officials, and I'll stand up to this president or any president in Washington who wants to commandeer our local law enforcement to enforce their broken Washington, D.C. priorities rather than our local community priorities.
Just to follow up, just so I understand, and this is really a yes or no, I understood Mr. Stapleton saying you would not support seeking out undocumented workers in rural areas for deportation.
That's correct. That is not the job of the governor.
I agree. I would not
It's
as
the job
well.
of the federal government.
So you agree on this. We've had, as another follow-up, we've had the federal government talk about financial sanctions and sanctions against cities and agencies who don't help federal immigration authorities. Would you support that, Mr. Stapleton?
I would support simply a governor's ability to end sanctuary cities in Colorado, so we have a uniform policy that has the back of sheriffs and police officers that are trying so desperately to keep our communities safe. We shouldn't have somebody that commits a felony who's entered this country illegally be released from jail in less than 12 hours. That doesn't make any sense. And even though Congressman Polis says that he agrees with me on this, his party's platform in this election is to make Colorado a sanctuary state. So, Congressman, if you felt so strongly about it, I think you owe it to law enforcement to have your party change its party's platform.
Thank you. Mr. Polis?
Well, that's the difference between us. You might be beholden to the Republican Party platform. I'm an independent thinker, a job creator, and somebody who's willing to take on both parties to get things right. Look, I think that we need to make sure that we keep our communities safe. And you've even attacked me for supporting opposing efforts that would penalize cities for their own law enforcement decisions. Of course, I'm against the federal government coming after legal marijuana, fining cities. I'm against Washington, D.C. expanding their power. That's why I'm running for governor. I support an independent Colorado.
Thank you.
And I'm willing to take on both parties to make Colorado's way of life.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. We're running out of time here, so I just want to give you 30 seconds each on this one, and this is a mental health question. Sheriffs in Colorado will tell you that a large percentage of their jail populations annually have significant mental health issues, and that's especially true in rural areas. A reader in Montrose asks, what's your plan to move mentally ill persons out of jail and into treatment, and how do you pay for it? Mr. Polis.
That's an important issue, and it's one that I hear from so many sheriffs across our state. I was talking to a major county sheriff a couple months ago who said about a third of their intake in their prison system were people who need treatment for drug abuse or mental health issues. And you know what? Our prison system isn't the best or most cost-efficient way to do it. It's not cost-efficient for taxpayers, and it's also not the most effective in terms of treating somebody with a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue, often which is an offshoot of an undiagnosed or untreated mental health issue. We want to expand access to mental health as part of our plan to bring health care and make it more affordable.
Mr. Stapleton, how do you get them out of the jail and into mental health treatment?
Last week, I had 2 high school students in my community in Colorado commit suicide. We have chronically underfunded mental health issues in the state of Colorado at the state level and the municipal level. I will be a governor that puts mental health first when it comes to health care. We have massively increased the Department of Corrections budget and have not spent the money on mental health that we need to. We need to invest in rehabilitative treatment and MAT treatment, and we need to better coordinate municipal and state responses.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Now, I'd like for each of you to ask a question of your opponent. Now, this should be a question that shows voters what you believe is your highest priority. You'll each have 1 minute to answer, and I believe Mr. Stapleton is going to go first.
Congressman Polis, I asked you this question last night, and you didn't answer the question, so I'm going to ask you again. I have a friend, Martin. He's been here for 10 years. He's an immigrant from Mexico, but now a U.S. citizen. He's been working in the energy industry, and it's provided him a happy life. He bought his first house a couple years ago, and his future is bright, but you're working against him. You've talked about a Colorado in which his job would not exist. You've worked on anti-fracking initiatives. You've worked on anti-pipeline initiatives. You've talked about rigging the game for a 100% renewable future where his job would be obsolete. Shoot him straight. How are you going to bring his job to Colorado when renewables don't come flooding back and you can't have a Colorado because you've wrecked the economy and busted the budget of our state?
Well, I talked to Martin last night, and hopefully I've earned his vote. I'm talking to him again now. Martin, I'm backed and supported by many of your fellow workers at the Pipe Fitters and Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, many of the men and women who work in oil and gas, because they know that I'll put workers first and I'll put safety first with regard to oil and gas. I'm proud of Governor Hickenlooper's efforts to make sure that our pipelines are safe. And I look forward to taking the next step to make sure that you have a bright future for you and your family by saving you money on health care. If you have young kids, making sure they have access to preschool and kindergarten and saving you money. And yes, making sure that you have a part of Colorado's future. Because you know what? We're going to have a lot of oil and gas jobs, but they depend on the price of oil and gas. My plan to move our state to 100% renewable energy will make Colorado even more of a net energy exporter. And as we shift to renewable energy, I want to make sure you have every opportunity in advanced manufacturing and renewable energy to make even more money to support your family.
Mr. Polish, your question for Mr. Stapleton.
With soon-to-be Justice Kavanaugh's approval to be on the Supreme Court, it's more likely than ever before that Roe versus Wade will be overturned. If our state legislature passes a bill to restrict or end abortions in the state of Colorado, as somebody who said they would be a pro-life governor, as somebody who picked a running mate that supported a radical personhood amendment that would ban IVF and many forms of birth control, would you sign a bill that restricted or eliminated the rights of women to control their own bodies here in Colorado?
Well, Congressman Polis, let me first translate to your response to my question. What you said was, I'm supported by the unions, and you still don't have a job, Martine. So as far as me, I said I'd be a pro-life governor because it's a matter of my faith. I also accept Roe versus Wade as being the law of the land, and I'm not going to speculate. When I raise my hand to become governor of Colorado, I don't raise my hand to accept just some of our Constitution. I accept all of it. It's not an a la carte offering. I accept Roe versus Wade as the law of the land, and I'm not going to speculate on whether it's going to be overturned because the two most recent justices to the Supreme Court weren't going to speculate during the time of their confirmation hearings. But what I will tell you is I'm going to enforce Colorado's Constitution as well, and it has been embedded in Colorado's Constitution that we shouldn't use state taxpayer funds for abortion-related services.
Thank you both. The candidates will now have 90 seconds for closing statements. A coin toss earlier gives Mr. Stapleton the opportunity to begin his final statement. Mr. Stapleton?
Thank you very much to Colorado Mesa for having me. I'm running for governor for three simple but really important reasons. My kids, Craig is 10, Coco is 7, and Olivia is 4. I'm running for their future in Colorado because I have a heart for service, because the Colorado I want is going to be one that will hopefully be filled with abundant economic opportunity, not just for them, but for all our kids in Colorado. I have a demonstrated track record as treasurer of Colorado of working with Democrats on pragmatic solutions, working with independents to put Coloradans first. We can achieve all of our goals and hopes and dreams in Colorado with the will to do it and the leadership from the governor's office that I plan to provide. I've done it as treasurer. I will do it again as governor. None of this will be possible, though, if we make the mistake of electing Congressman Polis as our next governor. He represents the most radical, extreme governor in Colorado's history, if he were to win. And I'm sorry to be the town crier on this, Congressman, but somebody has to be honest about your record. You have promised $90 billion of spending from healthcare to energy to education that would triple our budget obligations in Colorado, and you haven't told anybody how you plan to pay for it. $90 billion is 90,000 million. That's a lot of money. It would bankrupt Colorado. It would result in empty government promises, and it's not the future that I want to have for my kids or your kids or any Colorado kids. Thank you very much for having me.
Mr. Polis, you have 90 seconds.
You hear these words tossed around, extreme, radical. These are fundamentally divisive words. I'm a uniter. I've worked with Republicans and Democrats nationally to pass our landmark federal education legislation. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves here in Colorado to get things done in a bipartisan way that brings people together. I'm not for the name calling. I might have some differences of opinion with Walker in some areas, and I'm sure I agree with him on others, but I value everybody's input. I was proud to sponsor a bill with Cory Gardner and Michael Brennett to help bring the BLM right here to Grand Junction or Western Colorado, even taking on some members of my own party to do it. I'm running for governor because I believe in the future of this state. I've run schools, I've served on the State Board of Education. We have a plan to end decades of underinvestment in our schools and make sure that every child has access to preschool and kindergarten, saving families money. I'm running because Coloradans are tired of getting ripped off on health care costs, whether it's prescription drugs or insurance. We have a 100-day action plan at polisforcolorado.com to help save you money so you have a little more money at the end of the month to enjoy the Colorado you love. We're going to take on the loopholes and tax subsidies in our tax code and pass the savings along to you in the form of reducing the income tax for small businesses and Colorado families. I'm running for governor because I have a background in business, creating hundreds of jobs in the private sector and empowering other entrepreneurs to succeed. I want Colorado to be a statewide success story, no matter where you live in our great state.
Thank you, Mr. Poulos. And thanks to both of you candidates. We really appreciated your remarks tonight. I think we learned something. And we thank the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel, the Colorado Mesa University, our colleagues at Rocky Mountain PBS, and the sponsors and underwriters of the debate, and thank all of you who are in the audience tonight. We hope that this has given you information that will help you make your decision about who should be our next governor. Regardless of your view, we urge you to vote. It's a right, it's a privilege, and yes, it's an obligation to ensure our democratic freedoms. To review tonight's debate and for other election information, we invite you to check out our website at rmpbs.org. We thank you for joining us tonight. I'm John Ferrugia. Good night.